Welcome back to another episode of the Blockrunner podcast. I'm your host, William, always here with your co-host, Ty Man.
What's going on, dude?
On the sticks, we got TJ.
Hello.
And finally joining us today, we got MDV joining the podcast. He just did a mint on Gamma. He's doing one on MScribe pretty soon. Thank you for joining us, dude.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, excited to talk to you too, man. We had a call a few weeks ago about like how perfectly aligned our like ethos is. You as an artist, us as, I guess, I don't know, contributors to this ordinal space with DMT and such. So
yeah, totally.
Your art like definitely stood out to us, and we're like, man, this has to be part of like.
Yeah, we got to do this on Bitcoin, dude. Like the substance.
Yeah, because you're already like basically as an artist. I don't know So we're gonna get into. Just kind of introduce yourself, your journey as an artist, first of all, and then how you got into Ordinals. But you were doing something unique that other artists I don't think were, which is like peering into the data of Bitcoin and trying to figure out how do I leverage that in some way in the creative process, right?
Yeah, totally. So my first project I launched, it was back in February. It was called Bitcoin Substance, and that was my first foray into this. And essentially, I looked at all of the data that's available on the recursive endpoints. There's more endpoints now than there were back then, but essentially I figured out, okay, so you're able to get content recursively from other inscriptions. You're also able to get the hash of the most recent block and also the time that the last block was actually mined. And so I kind of just like thought through in what way can I have the art be reactive to as much of this data as possible?
Yeah.
And the piece I landed on there with that first collection is that over time, the art would actually evolve and react to how long it's been since the last block, which made it like block time reactive is what I called. And since then, I'm expanded to having the art evolve with the most recent hash of the block, using even more and more recursion than I had before. I think, as you said, it's kind of a natural evolution to take all of the DMT technology and kind of expand upon that. So not only using all of those existing recursive endpoints, but also taking the data from the block, as much of it as I possibly can, and use that as seeds to create more interesting traits and make the art more connected to Bitcoin.
How did you what was the inspiration for that? Like, because you started this before, you weren't really aware of DMT, were you?
Oh, no. Yeah. I guess a tiny bit of background on me. I'm a programmer, software engineer in my real life. I work for a startup, and I, for some actual work projects, I had to learn how to do a little bit of 3D tech. I had to learn Three.js for some web design I was doing. And I just kind of fell in love with it, how simple it is to display. You don't need to install anything. You don't need to download a program. It just displays right in the browser, and it can be essentially as powerful and as cool as you want it to be. It's just a fully 3D, fully interactive engine. And after OCM inscribed the whole Three.js library for their collection, I kind of just saw that as like, oh, whoa, this is so aligned with stuff I already know how to do. I already am really invested in Ordinals, been there since the beginning, and it kind of made me think, hey, maybe I should transition from collector to creator. And I guess just in terms of why I chose to want to be so connected to the data, I guess it kind of just makes sense. It's
interesting.
What makes Ordinals different than any other NFT or any NFTs on any other chain. And I think it is that the data actually is on chain, and that the constraints of needing to use recursion, needing to minimize file size, and needing to get everything to fit within the ecosystem and constraints of Bitcoin. That's kind of what makes it beautiful. And so referring back to the on-chain data just kind of made sense from there.
That's fascinating to hear you say that, because we had those same like internal like discussions amongst ourselves whenever I don't know if you were familiar with like the origins of Bitmap at all whenever that kind of surfaced in the Ordinal space.
Yeah, totally.
Literally a year ago, but we were questioning ourselves, like, why was this so like instantly like had this gravitational force, right? Like we've been in the Metaverse space for years, but something about this just really stood out, even though it really wasn't anything. It was just like a text inscription, right? But something behind it that had like a real power to it and a beauty, like you said. And then we started thinking about it. It was, well, like, Rare Sats kind of has that too.
Yeah.
The ordinal theory itself has that.
Yep.
And it's like, well, it's this deep connection rooted to like the on-chain presence of data, right? And like leveraging that for some sort of like new layer of value creation, right? So once we started really understanding, it's like, dude, that's really what's happening in this space.
That's the new stuff.
Yeah.
In crypto.
But nobody really defined it.
Yeah.
It was more so like, like digital artifacts. It's actually on chain this time as opposed to like off chain pointers or whatever.
Yeah.
Those are the narratives.
That's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. but that's what everybody was kind of like gravitating to. But we felt like there was an underlining like
value proposition,
an umbrella like happening surrounding this whole ecosystem of ordinals and Bitcoin. And that's what led us to DMT, right? We came up with like a name for it. This whole thing we're all doing it's digital matter creation, I guess. So that's the theory behind it. But it's really cool to hear other people like yourself, just kind of like you naturally came to the same conclusion we did. It's like
it really is a very similar journey.
Yeah, and the name you came up with and everything, BTC Substance.
Yeah,
I told
what
you.
What happened since?
Yeah, it was like that was our opening liner for the Git book. It's like a new era of digital substance. It's really what we feel like potentially we could be unlocking here, right? But I don't know. We haven't gotten to like the fully like empirical grounds of that yet. I guess potentially, like we're still in the experimental phase. But nonetheless, like we're on our way. I guess if you can introduce us a little bit to the Vessels project. So DMT, how aware are you of like the origin of like the UNAT space, like how everything kind of started with NatCats and how what's your reaction to how the unique non-arbitrary token space has kind of proliferated? It's only been about 6 months, really. So what is your reaction to it, your opinion on, is this actually something new that artists should be leveraging, stuff like that?
Yeah, totally. I think it's really cool. I think one of the things that the medium of Bitcoin art, I think it kind of lends itself really well to things that are generative, and that's because it's difficult and both financially and space-wise to just take an entire fully rendered single PNG and put it on chain. That's like not what ordinals are for. It can do that, but I think it's definitely not the thing it's best at. And so I think, the constraint has always been, how do we get these file sizes as small as possible? How do we make this more efficient? How do we make it easier and more approachable for artists to actually use, lower the technical barrier? And I think, DMT is, a lot of people have tried to find different ways to do that. There's a lot of different solutions that have come out. And I think DMT and UNAT specifically, it's really cool because it's like a consensus on a way to sort of accomplish that, to make it so you have all of these different pieces, whether it's an SVG image that's brought together from a whole bunch of different shapes and code, or smaller image assets combined together, or in my case, whether it's 3D assets and like a generative algorithm on chain. Regardless, it's still like an extremely efficient way more efficient than pretty much any other file method you could, to still have the highest quality, most engaging, most like visually appealing art. And I think it's really beautiful how well it mixes in with the constraints of the medium. So just from watching DMT, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's like kind of a natural conclusion, and it seems like it's really getting a lot of traction recently. So I'm excited to be part of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think so we talked about that because there's been, I guess, a little bit of misunderstanding among people, like whether or not these things are actually truly on chain. Whether it's pulling from some sort of stored off chain image data layer, something like that. So we kind of had to go through a little bit of more of like an education process, so people kind of understand how all of this is actually operating. And I think what you're doing here with your collection that's going to release soon, it is literally an ultimate demonstration of what 100%. You just talked about. Like, I wouldn't imagine something like this could be supported on Bitcoin, just because of, I don't know, you can kind of get into us if you kind of pull up like a demo of what the vessel actually is. Like, how much did it cost for you to actually put this together? Is this something other artists could do? Just to kind of like really paint a picture of the technology behind it and everything that went into it.
Yeah, and totally. Should I pull up a screen share, or should I just kind of?
Go ahead. Yeah, you can screen share.
Host disabled participant screen sharing is the error I'm getting on Zoom.
All right, should be clear any second now.
Okay.
If you click on share on the little arrow, the arrow instead of share, right there, and then multiple participants. There you go. All right, it's clear.
Nice, that worked. Cool. Yeah. So when I'm pulling up here, let me know if that's showing a Chrome window with the vessel in it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool. Yeah. So this is essentially just like a preview script, because the mint hasn't actually happened. There's no actual, inscriptions of the DMT mint itself for this to refer to. So this is behind the scenes. It's pulling from a random one of the valid blocks, and it's applying a random inscription ID But this is exactly what you would get from an average DMT-Vessels mint.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, to walk through this a little bit. So yeah, this is using a whole bunch of different Ordinals tech. It's using almost all of the recursive endpoints available. It's pulling in, I think there's 27 different recursive calls it's doing just to get the variety of the libraries and the 3D models. But yeah, the actual file itself, I think it's like 11 kilobytes, and that'll be the engine for everything. So
that's crazy.
Allowing to generate, all 4,032 different, it's actually more like 10 million possibilities, but
yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm using libraries that have been built by other projects, and also libraries that I've put on chain myself that I needed to add on to this.
Yeah.
And so I love that about Ordinals. It's naturally collaborative. Like when someone makes progress and gets something new on chain, there's a lot of devs are in different group chats, like sharing the different libraries they put on chain. So yeah, it's definitely a group effort for sure.
So you have a couple of things happening here. So you have individual GLB models that are embedded within Bitcoin, and then you also have, I guess, 3D models that are generated within code, right? Which I'm assuming is those spheres. Is that correct?
Yeah, totally. So in this case, right now, this hand down here, so it has a wireframe material applied. I have a couple of different ones that I've like preloaded. But yeah, so in this case, the hand itself and the crown are both GLB models that I'm pulling in, and then I'm manipulating their size and shape and rotation and the materials to make them look the way they want. And the material itself is what makes this one look like a diamond. That last one looks like a wireframe. Right. So those are being pulled in, and I'm using Three.js actually has the ability to decode those compressed GLB files and then display them. And then from there, I'm just manipulating them like geometries, like objects. And outside of that, this orb itself right here, that is, and the spheres around it, those are all created with code. And then what's inside here, it's actually shader code. So it's like a complex, different array of custom shaders that's randomly creating that. And it's shaders that are also being masked so that they don't like go outside the confines of the sphere. So that's what we're looking at here.
Are you able to dynamically change the textures of these 3D models in code, or you can't do that?
Yeah, should be able to.
Yeah, that's cool. So you have a ton of flexibility here with like this structure. What I'm thinking about here is like this. Once this
just turned off wireframe.
Once this is on, once this is on chain, I feel like this is going to be like a framework for other 3D creators to really put together some really cool stuff.
Yeah,
and then make this interactive and potentially become sort of like the beginnings of the application layer of the metaverse.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that, like your opinions on the metaverse in general, right? Because you're a 3D artist, and obviously this is like the natural display grounds, I guess, where like this beauty can be like even more properly on display in like a metaverse environment, which is obviously our focus, that we want to kind of enable that.
Yeah,
and this would be like a killer showpiece of that. And because we have experience in the metaverse, and we always felt like the 3D art space was severely underappreciated, mostly because the metaverse isn't like a widely adopted human like activity yet, as much as Twitter, right? So 2D PFPs make a lot of sense as far as like what the market is demanding.
Yeah.
But I feel like once more people spend more time in these like immersive 3D environments, like these are the actual grails of the market that are hidden, right? Like the uniquely generated 3D art pieces, like that is something brand new.
Yeah,
like is what you're talking about.
That's right.
So totally, yeah. And this will be my 7th collection on Bitcoin, all of which are generative 3D art. So that's what I've been doing the whole time. And once this is released, I'm happy to make a public Git repo that's essentially all of the building blocks of code you need to do Three.js and UNAT DMT together, because there is some complexity there. I started with the repo that On-Chain Monkey put up for their original Three.js deployment, and then I sort of had to adapt that to fit within the DMT UNAT space. So I'm happy to make that public. Might as well share the advancements with everyone.
Yeah. So a lot of this depends on. Well, I guess to a certain extent, it depends on the GLB stored within Bitcoin. So do you think storing 3D models on Bitcoin is like a sustainable thing, or do we need to really put our heads together and figure out like a different storage medium for a lot of these assets? Well, what's your opinion on that?
Good question. Do you mind if I just briefly show the last project I launched, because it's pretty relevant?
Yeah, go ahead. Of course.
Cool. So this is my last project that's currently out on Gamma right now. It's actually almost minted out on the public phase if anyone's interested. It's called Gen Skulls. But essentially, it was trying to approach that question of, okay, so if you want to actually have a high quality, interesting, varied 3D model that has movement and animations, and you just take that entire file, if it's an OBJ file or a GLB file, it's going to be multiple megabytes. If you want it to be fully rigged and actually have like a high number of polygons and have the animations embedded, that's pretty much, I mean, that's oftentimes more than a whole block. That would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes. So the other approach you could take would be to essentially piecewise it, like cut up that 3D geometry into smaller pieces and then manipulate those with code after. And then, so that's what the goal of Gen Skulls is I took 18 different 3D models and I put them all on chain. And I compressed the heck out of them, and I removed the materials, and I made them just really, really simple, bare bones 3D models. And then from on the code side, which is much more space efficient, I'm able to modify them, make different combinations of them, add animations, add movement, and manipulate them. And so I think that does make sense. It's just like a different way of thinking about and approaching 3D art. So I think it is possible, and it can be sustainable, especially at the fees are at right now. But yeah, so it's like a perspective shift, I guess.
Yeah, I totally understand. So you took a complex 3D model and you just broke it up into pieces and then uploaded those pieces to Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I essentially compressed it as much as I could to have it still look like the thing that it was.
Sure.
So I was able to get I think, there's 18 3D models for all the different traits. Most of them are less than 5 kilobytes. So there's a couple of them I was able to do for like $10.
Oh, okay.
Just to get it on there. Then from there, I'm loading it in. There's a lot of recursive calls it has to do. But with how fast servers are, it's still like 1 second of load time or less generally.
Yeah. Did you happen to use on-chain compression like Brotli?
So I'm not using Brotli. I am obfuscating the code, and also OCM's library by default, it's using, I think it's FF late is the algorithm it's using. But yeah, all the code's compressed.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, this art is pretty cool, and the fact that it's completely on-chain, like that's crazy.
Yeah, everything's on chain. It loads natively on ordinals.com with all the traits and everything, and then has this like default display from a screenshot method, which is cool. But yeah, so this is the last project I did, and it's I think it's a different way of looking at and thinking about PFPs. Like this still has the feeling and personality of a PFP, but it is fully 3D. You can interact with it. You can apply filters to it. You can change the way it looks. You can export screenshots of it in whatever method you have. So that's cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Just a tiny plug. There's still like 70 mints left of this guy. And anyone who mints this or has a piece of this gets whitelist for Vessels. If that's okay to say.
Yeah, no, of course.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, we're down to go through your full catalog of previous work if you want. I'm wondering if there's some sort of tie together because of you have body parts here on display.
Yeah.
No, I think you just brought that up. It was the first time I thought about it because my very first collection, it was blobs. And then from then I moved on to really just thinking about, I have a collection called Creations that's been about every week or two. I just kind of like come up with some sort of conceptual idea and then just put it on chain. There's all kinds of different stuff in here. Some of it's like representatives of collections I've done. Some of it's more like concepts like this fire versus water.
I could tell that you have a look. You have like a style.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's thank you. I appreciate that. It's been developing. I'm sort of letting the way like what's easy to do with the code and what's feasible to do with the code. I'm letting that inform my style, kind of push me in the direction that it seems to want to. So.
Right. Yeah, it's impressive because it's like Picasso. If Picasso kept painting, they would all look very similar.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the.
It's like the signatures.
Yeah, that's one of the components of art, right? That makes it so collectible.
Yeah,
and like you have different collections with different, I guess, maybe objectives in a sense. Like the blobs, there's only 100 of them, right?
Yeah, that was my Genesis collection, and it was in some ways you can think of it as a proof of concept because it was like, okay, can I make this like fully interactive on-chain? Like block time aware, self-referencing, inscription ID, randomized. Like it was like the through line of thinking of all of my collections since then, but it was kind of like the simplest. My screen share is making us little. You guys have seen it before. Yeah, it was like the simplest way that I could get that set of ideals on chain and make it effective. And I did a small supply. I was a really unknown creator at the time. I think I had like 300 followers or something when this launched. So it started from here and then has completely morph from there to essentially, once you have the through line and you have the proof of concept, then how big can you make it and how complex can you make it?
Yeah.
No, I love it. It's like your art and the collections themselves, they're telling like a story of like an evolution.
Yeah.
You're starting out as just like almost like a gaseous state.
Yeah.
Kind of like how the universe began.
I thought about that with like the, you know, like a planetary nebula or whatever. Exactly, it's like literally starting as just nothing, like a blob of mass, and then it's moving into these body parts.
It's
like
organizing.
I might do something with that in the future. Now that I have head and hand so far. So
yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. It's interesting for us to kind of learn and peer into the mind of an artist, because me and Will, we are not artists. As ironic as that is, because we kind of like almost by accident kickstarted a new wave and of like new ways to approach the creation of art.
Yeah,
we're the last people on earth you would expect to kind of like put that into motion. But because of that, now we're learning, I guess. So like, where does the actual like the internal soul of the art itself coming from, right? So it's something we've never been exposed to, I guess, personally. Maybe. Yeah,
there's a lot of engineering involved. That's for sure.
Yeah, the PFPs obviously made sense. You know, because as like a meta, I guess it seems approachable. Everybody has like their unique asset, and like, you know, it forms identity and stuff like that. So we played video games a lot growing up, so that made a lot of sense to us, like why people were gravitating to that.
Yeah.
But you're like in a different, you and a lot of other artists, you know, you're bringing in the PFP into your new collections and such, but you know, you have a much more like flexible approach, and like as far as like narrative of what it is you can create. Because what we've noticed is like the PFP creators, they kind of get like pigeonholed into like a role. It's like, you know, once you create a 10K collection, you're basically stuck, and like you better be doing everything to like service that 10K community, and then like that's really it. Like that's the bounds and scope of what you can offer now.
Yeah,
like,
you can't really do much beyond the 10K PFP.
Yeah, like once you get a 10K and it's like minted out, it's like you're locked into that life, right? As an artist. So I'm wondering, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is that like the final state of art in crypto, or is there like a new horizon that I guess the whole industry kind of needs to like embrace, so that artists have more like flexible ability? You know what I mean?
Oh man, that's a really big question.
Yeah,
I feel like the 10K meta has been the meta so far most of the time. It's maybe short-lived deviations away from it. And I totally agree with what you're saying, that it kind of pigeonholes the artist in. It's like from then on, they're either making like free airdrops for those people, or giveaways, or like offshoots, or like maybe a smaller, cheaper version of that same 10K, but it's still like that is their identity. That's an interesting question. I think that the ability for an artist to continue evolving and continue to make more art, and if you like that artist and you want to keep investing in them and see where they go, I think that is really important. As an artist myself, I like to try to reward my original creators as much as possible. So I always give anyone who owns the 100 substances, they always get whitelist everything, usually in free airdrop, sometimes priority, lower price purchases and all that kind of thing. So I agree with the need to reward your collectors, but I also think that artists need to be free to keep moving forward. Otherwise things stagnate. So it's kind of a mix there.
Yeah, I feel like the metaverse really opens up the ability for artists to become creators, where an artist has like these limitations, but a creator should continue creating, even though they're the same thing. But the metaverse really opens up the I guess the market for like more stuff, right? Make more stuff. Don't just like make one thing and then that's it.
Correct.
Right. So I feel like
that makes a lot of sense.
From that angle, I think we need to really kickstart this metaverse concept, because the whole pitch of the metaverse is that it could become much bigger than the physical market, and you can't really do that without creators. And so adding fuel to the creators and giving them a framework and tools and technology is going to enable that. And so that's really what we want to do, what we want to focus on.
Yeah.
And you're already like on the way there.
Yeah.
Totally. I appreciate that. And I couldn't agree. I was going to show you, just speaking of metaverse. So after I released the first Bitcoin substance, the first collection, I built this. It's called BitSpace. Essentially, it has all 100 of the substances with their data pulled directly from chain and rendered all together. Each of them has one essentially XY plot that has a certain width. And after this, I also dropped a set of deeds that each correspond to each like XY plot that each one of these is in.
Wow.
And it's something that I plan on continuing to expand as I have more collections, adding them to this bit space, which is kind of like a metaverse, but using the 3D tech that I've been using so far. So it's more of a long-term goal. It's something that I've been like kind of brainstorming, thinking about how to implement and how to make more mainstream and more easy to use. But as Ordinals kind of keeps expanding, it's getting more and more possible and easier.
This definitely reminds me of like the Big Bang, like the early metaverse is like forming here.
Yeah.
Yeah, this looks
totally
cool.
So.
Yeah, this is pretty wild.
This will keep expanding for sure.
Yeah, it's just so what are your thoughts on so we're kind of like talking about the market of art, I guess, and how it obviously has a killer presence in Web3. It was like the driving force of the last cycle, right? Of interest is like, proving that non-fungible token technology is a big deal, and it can bring in a lot of interest in the space. So how do you see that progressing? Do you see like AI as something that could potentially disrupt that in any way? Because me, myself, personally, I don't know. I understand the beauty of the technology of AI and how powerful and impactful it is, but me as like a human individual, for some reason, it doesn't feel as magnificent when I see like an AI rendering as like a human rendering, right? What are your thoughts on that? Is there like a threshold as far as like leveraging that technology in any way? Have you thought about that? And what are your predictions as far as how the art space evolves along with that technology?
Totally, yeah. Well, I guess for me as like a 3D generative artist, it doesn't super feel like that space has been threatened much by AI. I could be wrong, but especially nothing on chain, but stuff that I've seen like in the exact space within where I work, I haven't seen too much disruption yet, but I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Like when you look at a piece of AI generated art, especially as time goes on more, our brains are more and more easily able to pick it out and say, oh, that's AI. Something about it feels not quite real. And it immediately like triggers this feeling inside you of like, generally you're like less impressed. You don't feel as connected to it. It doesn't feel as real. And I think even as AI gets better, I don't think that innate feeling is ever going to fully go away. I think that there is definitely, it's like with any medium, the better the technology gets and the more accessible it is and the easier it is to create, the higher the ceiling of art goes. So I think AI being incorporated into an artist process can eventually lead to better art.
Yeah.
But I also think that it has to still have a lot of human input in order for it to feel real.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, would you consider yourself like a 3D modeler?
It's funny because not super. I mean, like, I would probably be faster for me to build a 3D model out of geometries in code, like by creating polygons and triangles and cubes and spheres and changing the shader logic, than it would be for me to go into Blender and make it.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's where I think like AI is more like a tool. So you could leverage AI to generate you a 3D model to basically give you that asset so that you can, do your art with it.
I see.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Or especially like, give me to a starting point where this is like the base geometry, and then I can add stuff from there and modify it, change it around from there. I've definitely thought, I haven't done it yet, but I've definitely thought about using some of the AI 3D model generation tools and putting them on chain. The main issue now is that even for a simple thing, like if you ask it to make a cube, it for some reason has like millions and millions of polygons. Yeah, because that's just how the AI works. Yeah. So it's not financially feasible yet, but eventually it probably will be.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, any output from an AI is still going to require editing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've seen so far with any AI tool you've introed to me. It's like, like this is cool and all, Will, but it kind of sucks at the same time.
I still have to do work.
It's definitely not done.
Yeah, it's like I don't like the way it sounds, or something. So it's not a completed product for sure, but there's enough demo out there to we all understand its impact, and it's gonna have for sure like staple of all of our, whether we're coders, artists, whatever. It's part of our workspace now.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with one of the heads of AI at Microsoft, and the interviewer asked them like, or actually somebody in the audience asked them, this audience member was talking about cryptocurrency and was asking the questions like, is AI just like this whole mania thing like we saw with cryptocurrency? And his response was, the value from cryptocurrency has not matched the same value as AI, even in real time. Even during the manias, like there wasn't that much value in crypto. And so I found that to be interesting. So it's like, so far, what are your thoughts on like the value and kind of like the product proposition of crypto in relation to like everything else that we've seen, like AI, where an AI is like any website you go to is like there's a business model, and it's they're trying to make money, as they should, right? But we don't see the same thing in crypto. It's like completely different. So it's like, what are your thoughts on, I guess, the product of cryptocurrency, and like it's does it bring something new that creators like yourself could leverage, right? Like,
I think the highest value prop I've ever seen from anything in crypto is the permanent, unlimited, permissionless storage that on-chain is for Bitcoin. I think out of everything else that's happened so far, like having transactions that are decentralized, that definitely also has some value, but not compared to literally making something that's impossible to destroy, impossible to delete, and owned by everyone. And so I think, like things like keeping old video game collections and libraries of classic games or literature or old movies, old videos, like having that be immortalized on chain, I think is a value that we haven't fully explored yet, and I think can be really cool.
Yeah.
Obviously, art is part of that too. But yeah, I've been in crypto for like 4-ish years, and I've seen a lot of booms and busts of various small technologies. I've been all in on stuff several times, only to realize it doesn't actually make sense the way I thought it did. So a little jaded, but I also recognize that there have been some advancements that have mattered and like done some world-changing stuff. So
yeah,
not to have too heated of a take.
No, that's good. Actually, I debate this all the time. It's like, what are the products, and what's the long-standing thing about cryptocurrency other than programmable money? And sometimes we struggle, but ultimately we come to the same conclusion. Is like having the ability to have storage that's on chain forever, like that's valuable, right? And so we need to really leverage that, and like you're doing with your art, like that's like a huge value proposition for anyone who's like consuming some of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's just something that I think about often, is like, what's the long-term gain here with this technology?
Yeah, and I guess
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, just to kind of continue down that that pathway is like if that's the killer, I guess breakthrough is the immutable storage of data, right? And information. So like leveraging that as like a new, like a substrate layer for creation, we feel obviously we have a lot of conviction, and that is like an underutilized or appreciation of like what blockchain technology is and what it can be, harnessed for. But I guess it's not so obvious until, again, it seems like when we have these discussions amongst ourselves, like all roads inevitably lead towards the metaverse. Or maybe we have like some sort of weird bias, or we live in some sort of echo chamber that we truly believe that with so much conviction. But it seems like that is the route that Web3 is kind of like taking, but it's not so obvious because, the killer applications of the metaverse haven't really surfaced yet.
That's right.
But yeah, once that does, I think the innate properties of digital creation, like when it comes to art, anything really, tokens itself, whenever there's like a non-arbitrary process to that creation, that manifestation process, I think that's whenever you could start to have like the obvious comparison, like the differentiation between something that is just kind of like based on nothing, really, just like creator input, as opposed to based on something that we've already identified as like a killer use case of blockchain, right? The Bitcoin's 15-year history of tamper-proof data storage, right? So, what are your, I guess, core thoughts around all of that? And what are your thoughts as a creator yourself? This is your first DMT deployment. What are your thoughts, like, from whether it's philosophical or whatever, that at some point you're going to no longer exist, but your art will continue to proliferate from Bitcoin
and continue generating.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like it's really not under your control at this point. Like, what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, that's when I was building the engine for this, I wanted to make sure that, so I'm doing a supply of 4,000, but I wanted to make sure that, it had enough variance to do essentially infinite or much, much, much bigger than 4,000. So I ran a simulation, got like 5 million different inputs before there was even one that was similar to a previous one. So that is something I wanted to do intentionally to make sure that this can keep expanding if and when it does. I and it's kind of like I said earlier, I think that the medium of Bitcoin is beautiful. The constraints of it on the artists, I think, create really cool art. And I think art's going to keep moving more in this generative direction as people realize that if you want to make more stunning visuals, you kind of have to move towards generating them with code. As opposed to actually putting like images on chain. So I think it's going to keep moving more and more in this direction. And I'm hopeful that when people look back, they'll see some of these earlier forays into that concept. So like in the future, when we have fully like incredibly detailed 4K millions of polygons through highly advanced code display engines with 500 recursive calls happening on chain, I think it'll be cool to look back and see where some of it started.
Yeah, I think the nature of Bitcoin and its expansion and being leveraged in this framework with DMT is like a huge value add, just because first of all, it's something new, and second, it's like it creates this ability for a collection to expand in a non-arbitrary way. Because the counterpoint is like when projects on Ethereum, when they expanded, it was met with like vitriol and like hate and everything. And so with this non-arbitrary expansion, it's like no one has control. And so it provides like this opportunity for a creator to continue, creating these assets in a non-arbitrary way where like it builds a bigger community.
Yeah, that's a big thing, right? Is community centered around art. We already talked about the 10K thing. Like once you actually build a community around that tends to be what it is. And yeah, you don't want to add any more supply to that because it actually has what we've seen so far is like disruptive. I guess
ramifications.
Yeah, from like a market perspective. But yeah, as an artist, like what would you like to see as far as like community growth? Like would you we have like dreams in our own heads of like seeing art collections into the hundreds of thousands of you know.
Why 10K, you know?
Yeah, like we've seen 2 blockouts before, right? With Bitmap and the NAT token. We have this thought in our head, like, well, why can't an artist come and just create like an 800K art collection or something like that? And there's like 100,000 people collecting this. What does that actually do? And the fact that, maybe multiple artists get involved in this process, right? Just to kind of make things dynamic enough and not like too repetitive and such. What are your thoughts on something like this? Like some new experimentation within like a
new meta.
Yeah, for art.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I think we kind of saw Runestone's, I guess, been the biggest successful collection that I can think of. I might be wrong. In terms of it being like an actual physical piece of art. And it definitely, we saw how the community reacted to having over 100,000 people with like 80 something thousand holders and everyone feeling connected to this thing. And instead of it driving the price down, it drove the price up. So I think it's definitely feasible and it's definitely possible. I think it all depends on the size of the actual Ordinals community, like how many active users actually are there. I don't know what that answer is. I don't know if it's enough to support 800,000 yet in terms of like a single or a set of 5 or 6 artists coming together. I don't know if the communities would be big enough. I'd love to see it. I'd really like to see it. I mean, if the mint was free or extremely cheap and it was really accessible and easy to do and easy to onboard, I think those would kind of be the requirements.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and something with like 850,000, like it could be free and or even only $1 or $2. And I think people would just eat it up, right? As long as it was like a coordinated effort between artists, I think it could work.
Yeah, that's why. So too. Yeah, that's what I like so much about this Ordinals and I guess DMT space is just there's so much room for experimentation, as we've seen, and as of right now, like I think the market needs stuff like this.
Yeah,
like it seems like we're kind of all kind of collectively, I guess, exhausted. For the last year and a half, we spent focused on Ordinals. And I don't know. I don't know really what's driving market sentiment. Is it really just because Bitcoin's down 5%? It's like,
is. Yes.
Is it really that?
Yes.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. So because Bitcoin's down 5%, I guess the market just is taking a break. But nonetheless, I feel like during these periods, these types of like magnificent experiments are warranted.
Yeah, I agree.
Because set things at a low entry price, like you're saying, but it's a potential shift in the meta, right? For if it works out, we could see this becoming like a replicable event, and new artists or whatever. It doesn't have to be artists.
Yeah, crypto needs a new meta. Like this 10K thing is like we need people to experiment. We need people to take risks. and we need bigger collections, bigger communities, right? If MDV, if I pitched to you and I said, hey, I got 10,000 users for my app, my Web2 app, would you be excited about that?
No,
absolutely not.
Nobody. I would be concerned you forgot a couple zeros there in your pitch.
Exactly. So how are we going to run around thinking that a 10K collection is like, 6,000 holders, 5,000, whatever it is? Like, is anything interesting?
Interesting.
Right. So we've got
feels like it's built on like an insider versus outsider, like us versus them, like the havers and the have-noters, and that's like what kind of builds a lot of the culture.
Maybe so.
Like,
yeah, maybe so. Maybe it's fine for like the concept of scarcity, but I think 100,000 holders holding something is still scarce.
Yeah, I feel like you could still have those micro communities within like a giant collection. It really that's the task, as from the artist perspective, is creating a script with that much complexity to where you can have like, you could still maintain, within like 1 million asset collection, that you still have pockets of
scarcity,
exclusivity,
sure.
Like, like little, it creates a much more like fluid dynamic, I guess, within the collection as a whole. Like, you still have accessibility for like a mass market audience.
Yeah.
At the barrier to entry, like, at floor level, these are like maybe $100 or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, because of the rarity scheme and all the different algorithms and data components that are leveraged, you still have your very scarce
100%
sub collections within the collection, stuff like that, right? So I feel like you could still fulfill all those market needs, and again, introduce like a whole new narrative, a whole new meta, whatever you want to call it, right? So, but yeah, that's for a future, hopefully a future, once artists are so bold to attempt something like that. But it seems maybe it's like from a coding perspective, a bigger challenge than what I actually imagined.
Here's what it is that it hasn't really been done before. And so we're typically like the human mind is like, oh, if it hasn't been done before, it can't be done. Right. And so, we need to think differently, and someone needs to be brave enough to actually do it and figure out, because it's not simple. Like, you can't just generate 850,000 pieces and like, that's good enough. Like, it has to be attractive. It has to be unique. I mean, you have to put in effort. Right. So
how difficult is it, MDV? Because I think you've created the most complex like script.
That's a good question.
Algorithm that we've seen so far. Like, we've seen quite the spectrum, right? Like, I'm not going to name whatever, like low effort attempts and like super obviously high effort attempts. You're in the very far end, the high effort attempt spectrum, right? How hard is that? Because maybe you can't like actually accurately quantify that because of your skill set.
Yeah.
It's
like normal to you.
To you, it was like, dude, that was easy.
Yeah.
What do you mean hard? But objectively, how hard is this? And do you think that's a major friction point for like adoption into the future, like for actual artists to one day be able to do what you did?
Yeah, totally. I think so. Parts of it were really hard. I think one of the biggest hurdles to overcome in terms of making enough variance is how do you create randomness that is repeatable for the same asset. So for this given inscription ID and block combination, or for my previous collections, for this given inscription ID and SAT number combination, how do you make it so it's extremely random, but every time you load that same asset, it has the exact same outcome? So it's deterministic randomness that needs to be on-chain replicable and also not take up that much space. So what I landed on was, it's called a pseudo random number generator. The algorithm I'm using is called ALIA. And so I put that full PRNG algorithm on chain, and it essentially takes a string input and it'll return convincingly human recognizable as a random pattern that will always be the same for a given input. So that determinism, I think that does a lot of it. And also because I'm using 3JS, there's things like, okay, the actual exact size and space and orbit path and movement of the stars and the percentage opacity of these things. There's like all these things are just floats. So I can do essentially almost unlimited variance with, and if I'm using a pseudo random number generator, then you're never going to get the same input twice, especially if you have like 100 different things that are being randomized. You might have things that kind of look similar and have similarities, which I think could be good because it would make you feel like you had a piece similar to someone else. So that was essentially starting out from that. That was my very first collection it was like, okay, I have like 5 traits that are all randomized and repeatable based on the on-chain data. And then something I've been unveiling with these last 2 collections is instead of that unlimited randomness, then essentially paring it back down. So let's say I'm still using the PRNG, but I want to have 8 different traits possible. And then I want that to be like essentially rounded down to have like a 8, like take the randomness, put it in 8 buckets and make it repeatable. And one of the concerns there with DMT was I had to choose a block space, like a set of valid blocks that had data that was easily parsable into buckets. Yep. So like one of the ones I found, I had to find ones that had a pretty even distribution curve for like transaction count and block size, which is not all of them. Yeah. So that was another challenge too. But I think anyone can use my Alia PRNG if they want. It's in my code. You can find it. But I think having more of those things on chain and more accessible so that not everyone has to go through the same process I did to come to those answers, I think it's good, and hopefully make it easier for other people.
Okay. So MDV, what is it feels like you're sort of on the frontier of like exploring, Bitcoin data and like just using tools like 3JS and all that. So what's next for you, like in terms of like the next frontiers? Like what are you going to be focused on next?
A really interesting question. Definitely for this past project, I've been focusing on just, as much of the Bitcoin data as I can possibly use. Something I really want to do, and it has to do with the most recent pull request that Pizza Ninjas and TO put out, is that you are now able to access who owns the inscription you're looking at and what else is in their wallet, which I think has a huge potential for making, if you own multiples of something, then that can trigger and change the art. And if you own past things from a person, then that can trigger certain traits, and you can sort of create, you can also reference and actually, like in my case, because I'm doing 3D rendering, there's no reason I can't render another piece inside the piece, like in its entirety.
That's right.
And so that's sort of like literal visual recursion. So let's say you owned 4 BTC substances and you load one of them, see the other 3 orbiting around it. And that's all completely actually happening on chain based on like the source of truth.
Yeah.
And if you trade it, it'll change. So I want to do that next.
That's cool.
I don't know exactly how to build the narrative around that yet, but that's kind of my next frontier.
So you said that's a pull request happening right now?
I think it just got merged like last week.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Sounds like we definitely need to work together on some sort of avatar integration potentially.
Yeah.
Right? It feels like some sort of natural way to kind of like non-arbitrarily assemble a unique avatar for the metaverse, right? Because if you're already kind of like making components of some sort of like humanoid
100%.
creature,
totally.
Right?
I mean,
I like the idea of that.
I don't see any reason why we can't just like, remember the Mii creator from like Nintendo Wii?
Yeah.
I don't see any reason why we can't just get those actual face traits and put them as like really simplified on-chain 3D models and then build a Mii creator out of that.
Yeah.
Like there's no reason you can't do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think we just have to deal with like frameworks like VRM and like the rigging, and then how to export that so that it works on multiple virtual environments. But yeah, I mean, there's no reason why we can't do it.
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
And, sorry, go on.
No, I'm just reflecting on the coolness. So I love the idea that I heard of the Pizza Ninjas they're requesting something, but I didn't really know what it was. So
right,
yeah, it does seem interesting and definitely an interesting avenue to explore. But I guess that's where my head always goes is like how can all this be applied for some sort of metaverse use case?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I definitely would love to see that, considering you're creating like this, or you can create this massive collection of 3D assets that can be pulled and rendered together.
Yeah.
In this like generative avatar process. So something we've been thinking about a lot ourselves, along with like all the other development we have going on in the metaverse direction. So have you, part of your thought process, have you thought about like maybe peering into the worlds of like 3D architecture, like starting to build like actual constructs of any kind, or you just want to keep things refined to like, the art space, 3D art space?
Good question. I feel like I've essentially just been looking around and seeing what other people are doing, and also kind of just tinkering around. Like I'll just come like after work, I'll come home, I'll sit down and I'll just like start trying to make stuff out of geometries. And if something gets traction in my mind and it feels like it makes sense and could become something, that's where the collection inspiration comes from. So I think architecture makes a lot of sense. I was working with, if you know Terabits, another DMT project, I was doing some consulting for them, essentially like 3D-ifying their code. And so I built like a terrain generation randomization algorithm, and I started building structures and stuff to add on to that. And that was not actually doing architecture, but it was essentially doing like Minecraft like terrain generation stuff. And I think that's something I think would be really cool. And I don't see a reason why buildings couldn't be part of that.
Yeah. I think generative content from the metaverse perspective is going to be massive. So it's,
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to see the same buildings all over the place. So if we can figure out a way to generate like unique buildings,
absolutely,
that's the way to do it.
Yeah, and if they're all data dependent, even better, right? We create a little non-arbitrary metaverse.
For real this time.
Yeah. You guys want to hear about my idea to make a fully on-chain self-referential metaverse in a way that hasn't been done?
Sure.
It's kind of a leak, I guess.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah. So something I've been wanting to do for a while. A while ago, I essentially recoded just the basic building blocks of Minecraft in 3JS. Just the ability to walk around, have full collision, jump, and then add and remove blocks and build stuff and have all that collision work correctly. Obviously, it doesn't have like the enemies and bosses and stuff, but just like the standard controls in existence, all of that is on-chain already. And then from there, I would have it so if essentially anyone can go and load any of the pieces in a like Minecraft world collection, and it'll render the whole area around you. But if you actually own a block of land, then if you reinscribe a JSON on it, then the next time anyone loads any of the pieces, it'll show the most recent changes you made to that space. So let's say you buy like 4 blocks that are near each other and you actually go build stuff on it, and then you click a button that says export your most recent buildings as a JSON, and then you reinscribe it on itself.
Yeah.
And then that would be fetched by everyone, and it would be just like essentially, I don't know if anyone's done something quite that fully 100% on-chain, interactive, and like shareable.
Yeah.
So that's a frontier
cool.
I've got.
No, that's cool. Yeah. So you're basically saying that this is a fully on-chain environment that is updatable based on reinscriptions of content.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yes.
Makes sense.
And there's no reason it wouldn't work, even with the tech we have right now. I don't think we need any extra tech.
Yeah, that's important because that introduces a lot of things that we feel are important about the metaverse. Is it needs to be non-static, right?
Yeah,
that's like thing that we hate the most about like the metaverse experience. We've kind of like had to
that and partying in the metaverse.
Yeah, yeah, that's the other thing we kind of like want to expand our horizons, but we want the most functional, the most robust and dynamic and metaverse experience we could possibly conjure up, right? And to do that on Bitcoin is obviously very difficult, but nonetheless still achievable, right? And ideas like this will help because we think that's what's going to actually inspire retention and get us to the point where people want to spend a significant portion of their time in a 3D space as opposed to these 2D interfaces that we're already currently addicted to, right? Therefore, art like this has like a real medium of display, like a persistent one, right? Which is, I think, very cool. I think it's an inevitable thing that the market at some point will be confronted with as like a reality. Just like, at some point the market didn't care about NFTs at all. At some point they realized like this is something of value, right?
Yeah, so that's right.
So I guess let's close it out on the details of the launch itself.
The vessels.
Yeah, DMT Vessels.
Yeah, sure. Want me to give like my quick elevator pitch for what Vessels is, and then I can go over like the launch stages?
Yeah, please. Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right. I'm going to pull up screen share. All right. Is that just showing a Gitbook?
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool. So kind of, the quick elevator pitch of what Vessels is to me. So it's a 3D on-chain generative art, and the concept of it from like a high level is I wanted to encompass the randomness and the beauty and the erraticness and unpredictability of Bitcoin's blockchain as like a living thing, but also show how it's been manipulated and changed and kind of constrained by humanity. So what's inside this display of this orb is sort of like the craziness that Bitcoin itself is, and then it's showing like humans' relationship with it, with the hand that's holding the vessel. So that's kind of like from the artistic level, top down. And I think, let's see, so this is just kind of an overview. I'll go through these pages really quickly. Something that I think is different about this DMT launch than any other one, as far as I know, is that when you choose your block, that is not all of the information that is actually used to create your vessel. So in the past, there's been issues with sniping where people have figured out from the code, hey, like if it ends in 6.9, then that's when you get the special trait or whatever. And then those went first. So I am using data from the block, but I'm also using data from the transaction that you actually use to inscribe. So the inscription ID and the sat number of the sat you put in, and data from that actual transaction will be incorporated too. So there is some stuff you could maybe do to research and prepare if you dig through code, but it's not going to be guaranteed that you'll get the trait you're expecting. And so I think that lets me have it all be fully on chain and immediately reveal as soon as you mint, while also avoiding the snipe. So that's, I think, something new.
Dude, that's so cool. That has to be like a framework going forward, right? For creators.
I don't see why not. I mean, I have, like, using my Alia PRNG, I essentially have two algorithms for randomness, one that pulls from the block hash and one that pulls from the inscription ID. And I can have different traits look at each one. So it should be pretty replicable if anyone looks at the code.
So that means, let me ask you a question. So that means that you don't really know how often a trait will occur until the mint is completed.
So there, like I was saying, there are some traits that are pulling purely from block info, and there are some traits that are pulling from inscription info, and some that are pulling from both. So I was able to run a simulation on the block range to get some of the deterministic traits, but I don't know what the whole thing's going to look like.
That's cool.
Makes sense.
That's cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's a mix of both.
Yeah.
So going over this, some of the data I'm looking at, block hash, like I mentioned, this has the Alia PRNG, which I think has been huge for me just in terms of like getting reliable randomness with effectively infinite outcomes. Pulling the inscription ID and pulling the block number, like most DMT projects do. I'm only using it for one thing, and it's not going to be easy to find in the code. And block size, I think this one's really cool. Just the actual size of data that was processed on the given block, which has a huge, like probably the widest range of any of the numbers that are in like a block range. So I'm using this for something cool, and same with transaction count. Those are both for two different traits.
Wow.
Moving on here. So a big thing that I think sets all of my art apart from other art is the interactivity of it. So not just, so there, it's using orbit control, so you can move it around, which I'm sure you've seen from some of these. You can pivot around, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can go inside this orb, and you can really see like deep inside what it is. You can zoom back out, and you can see like the ecosystem of your world. I think that's all really cool. Another piece that I like is it's touch sensitive. So you'll see like when I click there, the orb's like detecting my touch, and it's moving all of the lightning over to that point, reminiscent of those like orb toys that we had when we were kids, the little electricity, static stuff.
Yeah, I was playing around with that before we started recording, and immediately got some stress relief. It's like a digital stress relief together. Ball. Yeah, I love it. I could see people just spam clicking that all day just to kind of like,
it's already really fun. And the third interaction point is this interaction menu. So this has been one of my staples in all my collections. These are all post-processing filters. So your piece will render, the way it renders by default, but you can also change it if you wanted to export a screenshot or a video of it looking any different way you want. So this is color inversion, which you can control. Hue rotation, just at 365 degrees of hue rotation. I can jack up the saturation. I can jack it down to give this sort of like sepia look almost. So bloom, this is a post-processing effect called bloom. That is a very like, action movie-esque, like think Transformers. You'll see a lot of this effect. My personal favorite one, this is Sobel edge detection. So this is looking at high variance between colors, and it's switching to auto black and light, and you're only seeing the high variance points.
Wow.
Which I think it's a completely different way to look at it. And here's, while I'm here, I'll show the last piece of interaction point. So I just got this finalized. So it actually has like FPS like Minecraft controls, where you can like go inside your orb, you can move around. So this is just WASD, space, and shift to move up and down.
Wow.
To really feel like you can get lost inside the world. You can see, you can go inside the hand, you can get different perspectives, and you can actually see the full detail. So that's the interactive piece.
Yeah, this is great, dude.
Yeah, this is more than just art. It's like a journey in itself. Right. And just
appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm in love with it already.
Yeah,
myself. And I'm, like I said before, I'm not like a
big
art
connoisseur.
Guy. Yeah, but I could genuinely say like I'm a fan of what you're doing here. Like this is pretty cool.
Yeah, you know what the best part about this is that as soon as this is on chain, like people can learn off of you and like sort of build on top of this stuff.
Yeah, it's all public. I mean, it's like I can't keep people from looking at my code. That's like part of Ordinals,
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to not obfuscate it too much and make it like the only thing I'm going to obfuscate is the traits.
How
they're actually being generated. But everything else, like if you want to see how I'm building my camera, how I'm using the FPS controls, all that stuff, like it's there. So that's for anyone else.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that this is great.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it a lot. Quickly going over some of the generative art stuff. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different factors, proprietary. This is all a lot of tech jargon, but GLSL is the shader engine that I'm using. So if you were to actually calculate, so look at this like circular inner orb with all the colors and the shapes and the like waves. If you were to try to actually code that as geometry and say, okay, this vertice goes here, this vertice goes here, and code it out like that, using the CPU would try to render it and it would crash immediately.
Yeah.
So instead of using JavaScript, you have to use this language called GLSL, which speaks directly to the graphics card, and that lets you do much more complicated, much more interesting interactions between stuff, which I have in here, like this sort of living, almost like sideways wave thing that's also being clipped by the outside of this. So I'm using GLSL for that. Already talked a lot about the randomness and the factors, but yeah, there's 13 primary factors and then a whole bunch of secondary factors that are non-discrete and have effectively unlimited choices. Using Perlin noise a lot, which is my favorite noise algorithm, because when you look at something generated by Perlin noise, it feels realistic. That's what people use for terrain generation a lot, is it'll make mountains and valleys and stuff that feels reasonably jagged, but also reasonably real.
Yeah.
Another piece, so there's one of my favorite parts is these orbiting dots. So I've got, I think there's 8 different base algorithms for these orbiting dots. And then inside there's a whole bunch of different parameters, and they change with time, and they'll be provably unique. And yeah, like I said, there's something in the block data is triggering this, but I won't tell you what.
Dude, that's cool.
Yeah, so there's some of them have sort of more this like scattered view. Some of them are, let's see, this one I like a lot. It's but they're all based in trigonometry. There's pretty simple trig equations that are just manipulating them in 3D space.
That looks like the pattern 69, dude.
yeah, I see that.
Wait, where do you see that?
This last piece is just about the 3D models. So as I've talked about earlier in the podcast, I put, for this project, there are 6 on-chain 3D models, but recently I've been essentially taking these really parsed down, really simplified 3D models, removing their materials and just getting just the geometry on-chain as these GLTF files. And that's sort of the base of what's letting these render. Here, it's impossible for any 2 of the horns, crown, or halo to exist in the same vessel except for very specific values of the redacted blockchain trait. So if anyone wants to, good luck figuring that out. But the special traits are the halo, the crown, and the horns, which you'll see all over my Twitter. Yeah, that'll be fun to see if anyone figures out how to get that to trigger.
Okay.
Updating over time. So this is another piece that I think is kind of one of my signatures. So in the background, you'll see this sort of orb of sort of flying around stars, and you'll also see a background color. So every time a block is mined, then the image will, in real time, it's constantly checking the mempool to see if a new block is cleared. Okay. And if it has, then it'll essentially rehash the algorithm for these stars, the total number of them, how they're behaving, and also the colors in the background. So that if you load this at a different time of day, it'll actually look and appear different. So this button, I'm clicking random last block, that's just triggering the randomness manually.
Sure.
But yeah, so this will always be different depending on the time of day, and it'll evolve over time.
That's great.
Yeah, you need to engineer the metaverse.
Yeah, you do.
I think you might be, what's the guy in the Matrix, the architect?
Yeah, the architect, yeah.
You might be
the
architect in the making. That's really crazy.
Just, everyone lives in a world like this, and this is their own little pod stuff. Yeah. And, I'm down. If you guys ever do want to do that 840,000 piece collection and you want some artists, I'm here. You know where to find me. So
hell yeah, dude.
That's what I wanted to hear.
We're putting. I'm just telling you, we're putting together a Marvel team. Justice League, if you will.
Yeah, we're planting the seeds just like we did for DMT. It's like we talked about DMT for several months before we actually deployed it, hoping it would inspire somebody to actually come up with the framework.
Yeah.
So we're doing it again. We're planting some seeds out there for you artists.
It's working, by the way.
What is?
The seeds are
ruminating.
They're growing.
Germinating, I guess. They're out there. Yeah. So new seeds. Yeah. Let's throw them out there. But thank you for offering your what did you call it?
Oh, totally, yeah. I've been recently. I tried combining both True.js and P5 to get them on chain at the same time for like a test piece, and that is viable. So if you have 2D artists, generative artists that want to collaborate on the same engine with me, you can do that.
Yeah.
Also, not very explored, but Tone.js, which is for audio, for triggering audio samples and like actually making like audio sine waves and stuff. Just like a very, very simple audio interface.
Right.
On-chain generative music. Not super done, so
okay.
let's
all right.
let's make some cool stuff together.
No, that's awesome.
That's pretty much all I had in terms of the elevator pitch. I think the art is really cool and really unique, and I think it not only tells a story, but also feels kind of connective to me as an artist. Yeah. And I really appreciate you guys giving me the time to show it off.
Absolutely.
I will quickly go over the phases. Pretty simple. So yeah, the mint is July 1, which is this coming Monday. It's going to be 7 p.m. UTC, which is noon Pacific time. Whitelist phase, $21. All M Crown holders get it. Everyone who minted my most recent collection, Genstills, get it. Anyone who's done a whitelist collab with me, and people who hold my original first 100 are going to be in there. And then phase 2. So since then, I've actually added Autograph from Japan. If you guys know him, he's also a generative artist. His collections have been added to phase 2, which is Tuesday at 7 p.m. UTC. And then this is a typo that's supposed to say July 3rd. So 24 hours later is public. And we've got the Royals and Nat Frogs and Oscillations, which is one of my older projects.
Awesome.
And
so, so is it July 3rd or is it July 10th? Or
it's July 1, 2, and 3. Yeah.
Okay. No, I guess I was thinking I must have remembered some other project.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, man, very excited about this for sure. I've been excited since the moment you agreed to create a collection for a DMT collection. I was like, man, I had to shoot my shot. I was like, dude, I hope this guy. I hope
I'm happy you did.
Yeah, I'm happy you accepted the not so much challenge because, like I said, you're the architect. This is like natural for you.
Yeah.
but we need this. We need this showcase to inspire new artists. I think that's what this is gonna do.
Yeah.
I think you're setting a new bar here with this because I'm honestly blown away.
Yeah, same.
Just how the scope of like how much effort you put into this. I think it's a reflection of who you are as a creator, which is obviously massive and significant, right? And I really appreciate you putting an M crown on some of these. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. That was definitely like the first thing. I was like, okay, this M crown's cool. Oh, it's in the right format. Oh, I can like decode it. Okay, yeah, it's on.
It's amazing.
We're making sure this is in there.
The M crown just kind of like happened so organically.
We didn't really plan it all that much. It was just like, let's do crowns.
Crowns are cool,
yeah,
but it's slowly starting to gain like stardom status. Like it's out there, dude. The crown is great.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the first and the most easily accessible on-chain 3D crown. Like it's going to be used a lot. Like not just by me, I'm sure.
Wow.
Like
it's so crazy.
It's easy to pull in. It's like not so high res and so many polygons to slow down the browser. It's like right in that sweet spot. So it's going to get bigger for sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, MDV. This has been a pleasure. I'm excited about the mint happening in the next few days.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Anytime you want to come on and showcase your new technology, your new kind of like creations, you're happy to like join us in this next conversation. But any like final words to take away? I mean, I know that July 1st is going to be the mint, 2nd and 3rd. I guess final takeaways from you, MDV.
Yeah, well, just thanks so much for having me. This has been a blast. I love talking to like-minded folks and kind of brainstorm about the future and think about what can be. Huge thanks to everyone who supported me, all the people in my Discord and people who have been there since I very started. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me.
Yeah, man.
No, see everyone next week.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, hopefully you enjoy the Blockpad experience. You know, it's definitely new. It's fresh. It's what we're trying to offer as a whole new vertical of experience, like minting assets on chain, right? We're just tired of the whole like clicking on a single button experience. You know, we want to be as closely aligned to Bitcoin as we can get, right? So, yeah, we spend a lot of time. So I'm glad you're putting something so quality, up for grabs for some of these blocks, right? So 4,032 today. Who knows what they'll be tomorrow? But that's kind of the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the point.
All right, guys.
Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, man, appreciate you. We appreciate you. And for everyone watching, all the links will be in the description. All the links to Mscribe, the links to the Twitter, they'll all be there. And thank you guys so much for watching, and we will catch you in the next podcast.
Peace.